The scream that echoed through the general store in Fort Davis, Texas, that sweltering August afternoon in 1878 was not one of pain, but of fury. And Eleanor Brighton knew immediately that she had made a terrible mistake by letting her voice rise above a whisper. Her husband Robert stood before her, his face red with embarrassment as the other patrons turned to stare, their eyes quickly darting away when they saw the fury in his expression. Eleanor felt her heart sink into her stomach as she realized what would come later, when they returned to their small house on the edge of town. She had only asked him why he needed to purchase another bottle of whiskey when they barely had enough money for flour and beans, but that simple question had been enough to ignite his temper in public. The shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat uncomfortably and wrapped their meager purchases in brown paper, his weathered hands moving quickly as if speed could somehow erase the tension crackling through the air. Robert snatched the package from the counter, gripped Eleanor's arm hard enough to leave marks beneath her cotton sleeve, and hauled her out into the blazing Texas sun without another word. The ride back to their property passed in terrible silence, the wagon wheels creaking over the dusty road while Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the horizon where the Davis Mountains rose in purple shadows against the impossibly blue sky. She had been married to Robert Brighton for 2 years, and for the first 6 months, she had believed herself fortunate. He had courted her properly in San Antonio, where her father owned a modest dry goods business, and had promised her a good life on his ranch outside Fort Davis. What he had not told her was that the ranch consisted of barely 10 acres of stubborn land, a handful of cattle, and a house that leaked when it rained. What he also had not told her was that he had a demon living inside him that woke up whenever he drank, and lately, that demon was awake more often than not. When they arrived home, Robert unhitched the horse with sharp, angry movements while Eleanor hurried inside, hoping that perhaps if she had dinner started quickly enough, his anger might dissipate. But she heard his boots on the wooden steps, heard the door slam, and then his hand was in her hair, yanking her head back. The blow came fast and hard across her cheek, snapping her head to the side, then another to her ribs that knocked the wind from her lungs. She crumpled to the floor, arms raised to protect her face, while he shouted about respect and obedience and how dare she embarrass him in front of the whole town. When it was over, he stormed out to the barn, leaving her gasping on the kitchen floor with tears streaming down her face and pain blooming across her body like poisonous flowers. That night, Eleanor lay awake in their bed, listening to Robert's drunken snores while her body throbbed with pain. She thought about her mother, who had died when Eleanor was 15, and wondered if her father would believe her if she wrote to him about what was happening. But Robert always watched when the mail came, always asked who she was writing to and why, always read over her shoulder until she stopped trying to correspond with anyone at all. The next morning, Eleanor covered the bruise on her face with powder and wore a high-necked dress, despite the heat, to hide the marks on her throat where Robert's fingers had dug in. When she went to town 3 days later to sell eggs, Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house noticed the fading yellow-green mark on her cheekbone. "My goodness, Eleanor, what happened to your face?" the older woman asked, her eyes wide with concern. Eleanor had her story ready. "I tripped over the porch steps in the dark. Clumsy of me, Mrs. Patterson's expression softened into something like pity mixed with disbelief, but she did not press further. Eleanor knew that look well now. She had seen it on the faces of other women in town, on the face of Reverend Michaels, when she had appeared at church with a split lip that she blamed on a cupboard door. They did not quite believe her excuses, but neither did they want to confront the ugly truth that a respected rancher might be beating his young wife. When she finally gathered the courage to speak plainly to Sheriff Dawson one afternoon in late September, showing him the fingerprint bruises ringing her wrists, he had looked uncomfortable and suggested that perhaps she was being oversensitive. "Now, Mrs. Brighton, marriage is a sacred bond, and sometimes there are misunderstandings between husband and wife," he had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Robert is a good man, well respected in this community. Perhaps if you tried to be more agreeable, less argumentative, these misunderstandings would not occur." Eleanor had stared at him in disbelief. "He hits me, Sheriff, with his fists. He kicked me last week so hard I could barely walk for 2 days. Did anyone witness these alleged incidents?" The sheriff had asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "No, but surely the bruises are evidence enough." Sheriff Dawson had shaken his head slowly. "Mrs. Brighton, I have known Robert for 5 years. He is a hard-working man who provides for his wife. Bruises can come from many sources. Women are delicate creatures, prone to accidents. Perhaps you should be more careful." Eleanor had left his office feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. If the law would not help her, if the church would not help her, if her neighbors would not believe her, then she was truly trapped. October brought cooler weather and a cattle drive passing through Fort Davis on the way north. The drovers camped outside town, and the local ranchers, including Robert, went to negotiate prices and trade information. Robert came home that evening in a better mood than usual, announcing that he had hired a cowboy to help with the ranch work for a few weeks. They needed to repair fences before winter, and Robert's knees had been bothering him too much to do the work alone. The cowboy arrived the next morning just as the sun was painting the sky pink and gold. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of hoofbeats, and looked up to see a tall man riding a paint horse up their drive. He sat easy in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning light, and when he dismounted near the barn, she noticed the fluid grace of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. Robert came out to greet him, and Eleanor could hear their voices carrying across the yard, though she could not make out the words. She returned to her work, pinning sheets to the line, but found her gaze drawn back to the stranger. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the deferential way he was nodding at whatever Robert was saying. Later that morning, when she brought water and biscuits out to the men working on the fence line, she got her first good look at the cowboy's face. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27 to her 23 years. His features were strong and weathered by sun and wind, with deep-set eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-green. When Robert introduced him as Lucas Zimmerman, the cowboy removed his hat politely, and Eleanor saw that his dark brown hair was overlong and curling slightly at his collar. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Brighton," Lucas said, his voice a low rumble that held a trace of an accent she could not quite place. Maybe German, given his surname, though his English was perfect. "Mr. Zimmerman," she acknowledged with a small nod, careful to keep her eyes downcast the way Robert preferred. She could feel her husband watching her, measuring her behavior, ready to find fault. Lucas took a long drink from the dipper, then handed it back with a quiet "Thank you, madam." His eyes met hers for just a moment, and Eleanor felt an odd flutter in her chest before she quickly looked away. As the days passed, Lucas proved himself to be a tireless worker. He arrived before dawn and worked until dusk, repairing fence posts, clearing brush, and tending to the cattle with a skill that made it clear he had been working ranches for years. He was quiet, speaking only when spoken to, but Eleanor noticed that he watched everything with those sharp gray-green eyes. Robert's mood had improved with the extra help, which meant fewer beatings for Eleanor, though she still had to endure his rough hands and rougher words when he drank in the evenings. She had learned to be grateful for small mercies, for nights when he passed out before he could hurt her too badly, for mornings when he left early and stayed gone until supper time. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything changed. Eleanor had been bringing eggs in from the henhouse when she tripped on a loose board on the porch steps, the same steps she had blamed for a bruise months ago. The basket went flying, eggs smashing on the ground, and Eleanor felt her ankle twist painfully beneath her as she fell hard on her hands and knees. She was still on the ground, breathing hard against the sharp pain in her ankle, when Robert came storming out of the house. He had been in a foul mood since waking, complaining about his breakfast, about the weather, about everything. The sight of the broken eggs sent him into a rage. "You stupid, clumsy woman," he shouted, and before Eleanor could scramble away, his boot connected with her ribs. The kick drove the air from her lungs and sent her sprawling on her side. "Do you know how much those eggs are worth? Do you have any idea how useless you are?" Eleanor curled into a ball, arms over her head, waiting for the next blow, but it never came. Instead, she heard another voice, low and hard as granite, step away from her. Now. Through her tangled hair, Eleanor saw Lucas standing at the corner of the house, his body tense and his hands curled into fists at his sides. He must have heard the commotion from the barn. Robert's face went purple with fury. "This is none of your concern, Zimmerman. This is between me and my wife." "I am making it my concern," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the anger Eleanor could see burning in his eyes. "Step away from her, or you will be dealing with me." For a moment, Eleanor thought Robert might actually attack Lucas, but her husband was no fool. Lucas was younger, stronger, and sober, while Robert was soft from too much whiskey and too little work. After a long, tense moment, Robert spat on the ground near Eleanor's feet and stalked back into the house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Lucas crossed to Eleanor in 3 long strides and dropped to one knee beside her. "Mrs. Brighton, are you hurt badly? Can you stand?" Eleanor tried to catch her breath, pain radiating from her ribs with every inhale. "I can manage," she whispered, but when she tried to put weight on her twisted ankle, she gasped and would have fallen if Lucas had not caught her. "Easy now," he said gently. "Let me help you." Before she could protest, he had lifted her in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing, carrying her around the side of the house to the small bench beneath the cottonwood tree where she sometimes sat to shell peas. He set her down carefully, then knelt in front of her, his face creased with concern. "May I look at your ankle?" he asked, waiting for her permission. Eleanor nodded, and Lucas gently lifted her foot, probing the swelling through her boot with careful fingers. "Not broken, I think, but badly twisted. You should keep off it for a few days." "That is not possible," Eleanor said quietly. "There is too much work to do." Lucas looked up at her then, really looked at her, and Eleanor saw the exact moment when he noticed the fading bruise on her collarbone that her dress did not quite hide, the slight swelling around her left eye from 3 nights ago, the way she was holding her ribs. His jaw tightened. "How long has he been hurting you?" Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. No one had asked her that question. No one had looked at her bruises and simply believed what their eyes were telling them. "It does not matter. No one believes me when I tell them." "I believe you," Lucas said, and the conviction in his voice made something break open in Eleanor's chest. "I believe every word." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, and Eleanor covered her face with her hands while her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She felt Lucas's hand rest gently on her shoulder, a touch so different from Robert's brutal grips that it made her cry harder. "I am sorry," she managed finally, wiping at her face with her sleeve. "I should not burden you with this." "You are not a burden," Lucas said firmly. "Mrs. Brighton, what your husband is doing is wrong. No man has the right to strike a woman, wife or not. The sheriff disagrees with you, so does the reverend, so does everyone in Fort Davis." Eleanor heard the bitterness in her own voice. "They all think I am exaggerating, or that I somehow deserve it for being a difficult wife." Lucas was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "My mother's second husband used to beat her. I was too young to stop him, just a boy of 12. I watched her make excuses, watched her cover bruises, watched her pretend everything was fine while she suffered. One night, he hit her so hard she did not wake up for 2 days. When she finally did wake up, she left him, took me and my sister and walked away with nothing but the clothes on our backs. It was the hardest thing she ever did, but she did it. She survived, and so did we." Eleanor looked at him, seeing the pain of old memories in his eyes. "I have nowhere to go. No money, no family nearby, and even if I left, Robert would come after me. He has made that very clear." "Then we will have to make sure you are protected," Lucas said. "Let me think on this. But for now, you need to rest that ankle and let yourself heal. I will handle the chores today." "Robert will not like that." "I do not particularly care what Robert likes," Lucas replied, and despite everything, Eleanor felt a small smile tug at her lips. Over the following days, Lucas took on more of the household chores whenever Robert was not watching, chopping extra firewood, hauling water, even discreetly mending the porch steps that had caused Eleanor's fall. He was careful never to be alone with her in a way that might fuel Robert's jealousy. But Eleanor felt his presence like a protective wall between her and her husband's violence. Robert seemed to sense the shift in dynamics and did not like it one bit. He found excuses to send Lucas on errands far from the house, worked him harder, and treated him with increasing hostility. But Lucas bore it all with patience, though Eleanor sometimes caught glimpses of barely suppressed anger in his eyes when Robert spoke to her harshly. One evening in early November, Robert rode into town with some other ranchers and did not return until long after dark, drunk and mean. Eleanor was already in bed feigning sleep, but that did not save her. Robert dragged her from the bed by her hair, shouting accusations about her being a whore, about catching her making eyes at the hired hand. "I have done nothing wrong," Eleanor sobbed, but Robert's fist slammed into her mouth, splitting her lip. He hit her again and again, and Eleanor tasted blood, felt her eye swelling shut, felt something crack in her jaw. She did not know how long it lasted. Eventually, Robert's energy was spent, and he collapsed into bed, unconscious before his head hit the pillow. Eleanor lay on the floor, shaking and bleeding, and knew with terrible certainty that one day he was going to kill her. She must have passed out because the next thing she knew, early morning light was filtering through the window, and every part of her body screamed with pain. She pulled herself up using the bed frame, biting back a cry as her bruised ribs protested. In the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized her own reflection. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, her lip was split and crusted with blood, and dark bruises covered her face and throat. She heard Robert moving around in the kitchen, heard him curse and slam out of the house. Through the window, she watched him stagger toward the barn, probably to work off his hangover. Eleanor knew she should start breakfast, should pretend everything was normal, but she could barely stand. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. "Mrs. Brighton, it is Lucas." "I brought fresh water from the well." Eleanor hesitated, then slowly opened the door just a crack. She heard Lucas draw in a sharp breath when he saw her face. "Dear God," he whispered. "Eleanor, what did he do to you?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and somehow that small intimacy broke down the last of her defenses. "Please," she whispered through her damaged mouth. "Please, you have to help me. I cannot do this anymore. He is going to kill me." Lucas's face went hard as stone. "Pack a bag." "Only what you absolutely need. Can you ride?" "I think so." "Good. I am going to saddle 2 horses. When Robert goes to check the south fence we are leaving, I know a place you will be safe. He will come after us. He will tell the sheriff I am a runaway wife, that you are a horse thief and kidnapper." "Let him try," Lucas said grimly. "I would rather face a judge than stand by and watch you die. Now pack your things. We leave within the hour." Eleanor moved as quickly as her injured body would allow, stuffing a carpetbag with spare clothes, her mother's Bible, and the small amount of money she had hidden in the lining of her sewing basket. Her hands shook as she worked, her ears straining for any sound of Robert's return. True to his word, Lucas had 2 horses ready when she slipped out the back door. He helped her mount, steadying her when she swayed with dizziness, then swung onto his own horse. "We are heading to Fort Stockton. I have a friend there, a woman named Martha who runs a boarding house. She helped my mother when she left her husband. She will help you too." They rode hard for the first few hours, putting distance between themselves and Fort Davis. Eleanor clung to the saddle horn, teeth gritted against the pain that jarred through her body with every stride. Lucas kept looking back at her with concern, but he did not slow their pace until they reached a small creek surrounded by mesquite trees. "We can rest here for a bit," he said, helping her dismount. "Drink some water and let me look at your injuries properly." Eleanor sank down on a flat rock by the water's edge, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Lucas wetted his bandana and gently cleaned the dried blood from her face, his touch so careful that tears sprang to her one good eye. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I have ruined your life. Robert will make sure you never work in Texas again." Lucas looked at her steadily. "You have not ruined anything. Eleanor, I want you to understand something. From the first day I met you, I saw something special in you. Strength, kindness, grace despite everything you were enduring. Over these weeks I have come to care for you deeply. I could not stand by and let him hurt you again. I would not." Eleanor stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know that you are brave. I know that you deserve better than what he gave you. And I know that if you will let me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again. Lucas, I am a married woman. You are a woman whose husband broke every vow he made to you. The law may not recognize that, but God does. I believe that with all my heart." He took her hand carefully, mindful of her bruised knuckles. "I am not asking you to decide anything right now. First we get you safe, then we figure out the rest. But I want you to know that I will stand by you, whatever comes." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness that had consumed her life for so long. "I do not deserve your kindness." "Yes, you do," Lucas said firmly. "You deserve that and so much more." They continued their journey, stopping frequently to rest Eleanor's battered body. Lucas was attentive and gentle, helping her up and down from her horse, making sure she ate and drank, finding soft places for her to sleep when they camped under the stars. He never touched her inappropriately, never took advantage of her vulnerability, and Eleanor felt herself beginning to trust him in a way she had never trusted any man. They reached Fort Stockton 4 days later, and Martha Clayton took one look at Eleanor's face and immediately swept her into the boarding house, clucking like a concerned hen. Martha was a sturdy woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and kind eyes, and she did not ask questions that Eleanor was not ready to answer. "You stay here as long as you need," Martha said firmly, showing Eleanor to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Lucas is a good man. If he says you need help, then that is all I need to know." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor healed slowly. The physical injuries faded first, the bruises turning yellow and then disappearing, the split lip mending, the swelling around her eye going down. The internal injuries took longer. She startled at loud noises, flinched when people moved too quickly near her, woke gasping from nightmares where Robert's fists were still finding her. Lucas stayed in Fort Stockton, taking work with a local rancher to pay for Eleanor's room and board. He visited every evening, sitting with her on the boarding house porch while the sun set and talking about anything and everything. He told her about growing up in a small German community in Missouri, about learning to be a cowboy as a teenager, about the sister he had not seen in 5 years, but still wrote to faithfully. Eleanor told him about her childhood in San Antonio, about her mother's death, about her dreams of opening a small school one day to teach children to read. "You would be a wonderful teacher," Lucas said one evening, his eyes warm as they rested on her face. The bruises were gone now and color had returned to her cheeks. "You have patience and kindness in abundance." "I never finished my own schooling," Eleanor admitted. "My mother died and I had to help my father with the store. Then I married Robert and he did not believe women needed education." "Then maybe, when things are settled, you could finish," Lucas suggested. "Fort Stockton has a small school. I bet the teacher would let you sit in on lessons if you asked." The idea seemed impossibly wonderful, and Eleanor felt that tiny spark of hope growing brighter. She found herself thinking more and more about the future, about possibilities that had seemed closed off forever. And increasingly, those thoughts included Lucas. She was falling in love with him. She realized one December evening as they sat together watching the stars come out. She loved his quiet strength, his gentle humor, the way he saw her as a person rather than property. She loved how he listened when she spoke, how he remembered small details she mentioned, how he never made her feel foolish or worthless, and she could see in his eyes that he loved her too. "Eleanor," he said softly that night, "I know it is too soon to speak of such things, and I know you are still healing, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have only grown stronger. When I look at you, I see my future if you will have me." Eleanor felt her heart hammering in her chest. "I am still married to Robert. I may always be married to him in the eyes of the law." "Then we will go somewhere the law does not know us," Lucas said. "California, maybe, or Colorado. Somewhere we can start fresh, where no one knows your history. We can say you are a widow." "It is not quite honest, but it is not quite a lie either. The woman you were when you were married to him, that woman died the last night he beat you. The woman sitting beside me now is someone new, someone stronger, someone free." Eleanor knew he was right. She would never go back to being Robert Brighton's wife, not if it cost her everything. She would rather live as Lucas Zimmerman's woman without benefit of law than spend another day under Robert's roof. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will go with you wherever you want to go." Lucas's face broke into a wide smile, the first completely unguarded expression she had seen from him. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. "I swear to you, Eleanor, I will spend every day of my life making you happy. You will never have to be afraid again." They made plans to leave in the spring, to head for Colorado, where Lucas had heard there was good land available for homesteading. Martha, when they told her, was delighted and confessed that she had been hoping from the start that things would work out this way. "I have seen enough bad marriages to recognize a good match when I see one," she said, patting Eleanor's hand. You two were meant for each other, law or no law. But their plans were disrupted in late January when a stranger arrived at the boarding house, asking questions about a woman matching Eleanor's description. Martha, bless her, claimed to know nothing, but they all knew it was only a matter of time before Robert tracked them down or sent someone who would. "We leave tonight," Lucas said grimly. "We cannot risk waiting any longer." They left Fort Stockton under cover of darkness, heading northwest toward New Mexico territory and then Colorado beyond. It was a hard journey in winter, but Lucas guided them expertly through canyons and across plains, avoiding main roads where they might be spotted. Eleanor had never felt freer in her life. Despite the cold, despite the uncertainty, despite the knowledge that they were essentially fugitives, she felt light as air. She was with Lucas, and that made everything else bearable. They reached southern Colorado in March, and Lucas found work on a large cattle operation near Pueblo. The rancher, a gruff man named O'Neill, asked no questions about Eleanor, simply accepted Lucas's statement that she was his wife and assigned them a small cabin on the property. It was there, in that tiny cabin with its pot-bellied stove and single room, that Eleanor and Lucas truly became husband and wife. Their wedding night was nothing like Eleanor's first wedding night. Where Robert had been rough and selfish, Lucas was gentle and patient, taking time to ease her fears, to show her that intimacy could be beautiful rather than brutal. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you hanging laundry in the morning sun." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back, and felt the last of the shadows that Robert had cast over her heart begin to fade. They built a life together in Colorado. Lucas was respected and well-liked, and Eleanor began helping the rancher's wife teach the ranch children their letters. Within a year, she had started a small school in Pueblo, teaching not just ranch children but anyone who wanted to learn. In the summer of 1880, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mix of joy and terror. Her only reference for pregnancy was the harsh things Robert had said about women being useless when they were breeding, and she worried that Lucas might feel the same. But Lucas was overjoyed. He built a cradle with his own hands, brought her wildflowers, and fussed over her constantly until she laughingly told him she was pregnant, not dying. Their son was born in March 1881, a healthy boy with Lucas's gray-green eyes and Eleanor's dark hair. They named him William, after Lucas's father, and Eleanor felt her heart expand with a love she had not known was possible. Lucas was a wonderful father, patient and playful and devoted. Eleanor watched him with their son and marveled that she had ever believed all men were like Robert. Lucas proved every day that men could be kind, that they could be partners rather than tyrants, that love was supposed to lift you up rather than tear you down. Over the years, they had 3 more children, 2 more boys, and finally a daughter. Their little cabin was replaced by a proper house that Lucas built board by board. Eleanor's school grew, and she became known throughout the region as an excellent teacher. Lucas became foreman of the ranch and eventually saved enough to buy a small piece of land of their own. They never heard from Robert again, though for years Eleanor feared that he would appear on their doorstep demanding she return. But Martha wrote occasionally with news from Texas, and in one letter in 1883 she mentioned that Robert Brighton had died, kicked in the head by a horse he was trying to break while drunk. Eleanor felt nothing when she read the news, no grief, no relief, just a strange emptiness where fear had lived for so long. That night she showed Lucas the letter. "You are free now," he said quietly. "Truly free. We could even make it legal, get properly married if you want." Eleanor thought about it, then shook her head. We have been married in every way that matters for 5 years now. I do not need a piece of paper to tell me that you are my husband and I am your wife. We made our vows to each other under the stars in Texas, and I have never doubted them for a moment. Lucas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Eleanor. Do you know that? You survived hell and came out the other side stronger. I had help, Eleanor said, smiling up at him. I had a cowboy who looked at my bruises and believed me when no one else would, who risked everything to save me, who showed me what love really means. I would do it again in a heartbeat, Lucas said. Every choice, every risk, every mile we rode. It all led us here, to this life we built together. I would not change a single thing. Their children grew strong and happy, knowing nothing of the darkness that had shadowed their mother's first marriage. Eleanor made sure of that, filling their home with laughter and love, and the kind of safety she had once thought was impossible. On their 20th anniversary of the night they left Fort Davis together, Lucas surprised Eleanor with a trip back to San Antonio. Her father had died years earlier, but she had stayed in touch with a few childhood friends through letters. They spent a week there, and Eleanor stood in front of her father's grave and told him silently that she had found happiness, that she was sorry she had not been able to say goodbye, but she hoped he understood why she had run. On the last day of their trip, they rode out to Fort Davis. The town had grown some, but was still recognizable. The general store where Eleanor had once raised her voice in fatal mistake was still standing. The house she had shared with Robert had new owners, a young family with children playing in the yard. Eleanor stood looking at that house for a long time, Lucas's hand warm in hers. That building held so many terrible memories, but it also held the memory of the morning Lucas had first said he believed her. The morning her life had changed forever. Thank you, she said softly, turning to Lucas. For seeing me, for believing me, for saving me. You saved yourself, Lucas replied. You were strong enough to ask for help, brave enough to leave. I just held the horses. Eleanor laughed and leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sunshine that always clung to him. You held the horses and gave me a reason to keep living. That seems like more than just holding the horses. They returned to Colorado and to the life they had built. Eleanor continued teaching until she was in her 60s, educating 2 generations of children. Lucas worked the ranch until his body finally told him it was time to slow down, and then he spent his days helping Eleanor in the schoolhouse and spoiling their grandchildren. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Eleanor would think about how different her life had turned out from what she had expected. She had thought she was doomed to suffer in silence, thought no one would ever believe her or help her, thought she would die alone and afraid in that little house in Fort Davis. But Lucas had believed her. He had looked at her bruises and said, I believe every word, and in doing so, he had given her back her life. He had shown her that love could be gentle, that marriage could be partnership, that she was worthy of respect and kindness. Their children married and had families of their own. William became a teacher like his mother, carrying on her legacy of education. The other boys took to ranching like their father, and their daughter surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, determined to help other women who suffered as her mother once had. Eleanor watched her children thrive and knew that she and Lucas had broken the cycle of violence that could have continued through generations. Their children knew only love and safety, knew that their voices mattered, knew that no one had the right to hurt them. In the spring of 1910, on a warm April morning, Lucas died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 58, Eleanor's hand clasped in his. She sat beside him for a long time after, memorizing his face, remembering every moment of the 32 years they had spent together. At his funeral, their children and grandchildren gathered, and Eleanor spoke about the man Lucas had been. She told them, for the first time, the full story of how they had met, of what he had saved her from, of the courage it had taken for him to stand up to Robert and help her escape. "Your father was the best man I ever knew," she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "He showed me that real strength is not about domination or violence. Real strength is about protecting those who cannot protect themselves, about standing up for what is right even when it costs you something, about loving with your whole heart. He was my hero, my partner, my dearest friend. I will miss him every day for the rest of my life, but I will never regret a single moment we shared." Eleanor lived another 8 years after Lucas died, continuing to teach and spending time with her ever-growing family. She never remarried, never even considered it. Lucas had been the love of her life, the man who had seen her at her lowest point and chosen to believe in her. No one could ever replace him. When Eleanor died in the summer of 1918 at the age of 63, she was surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were, "Tell Lucas I am coming home." They buried her beside Lucas on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a view of the mountains they both had loved. The headstone read, "Eleanor Brighton Zimmerman, beloved wife, mother, teacher, 1855–1918, and beneath Lucas's name, together forever." But the real legacy of their love lived on in the children and grandchildren, who carried forward their values of compassion, courage, and unwavering belief in the dignity of every person. Eleanor's story, of survival and redemption and finding love in the darkest circumstances, was passed down through generations, a reminder that it is never too late to escape, that there are people who will believe you, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. And in a small museum in Pueblo, among other artifacts of Colorado's ranching history, there hangs a photograph of a dark-haired woman and a gray-eyed man, their hands clasped, their faces peaceful and happy. Beneath it, a placard tells an abbreviated version of their story, of a cowboy who believed a battered wife when no one else would, who helped her escape and built a new life with her. Visitors to the museum often stop at that photograph, drawn by the obvious love shining from the faces of the couple captured there. They read the story and wonder at the courage it took, at the risks they accepted, at the power of one person choosing to believe another, to see their truth and act on it. The photograph was taken on their 10th anniversary in 1888, when their children were still young, and their life together stretched before them full of promise. Eleanor's hand rests in Lucas's, her smile radiant, her eyes clear and unafraid. Lucas stands tall and proud, his hand gentle on hers, his expression tender as he looks at the camera. It is a photograph of two people who found each other in the midst of darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. Two people who proved that love, real love, heals rather than harms. Two people who built something beautiful from the ashes of trauma and fear. Their story became a legend of sorts in southern Colorado, told and retold, embellished and simplified, but always returning to the same core truth. A woman was being hurt. No one believed her. Until a cowboy looked at her bruises and said the words she desperately needed to hear. "I believe every word," 3 simple words that changed everything.